Welcome to the VET S.O.S podcast. Remember, don't drown in the sea of transition. Grab the VET S.O.S lifeline. VET S.O.S is brought to you by the Who You Know Network and proud members of the Parade Deck community. Today, we're sitting down with Shannon Huffman Polson, author, podcast host, and founder of the Grit Institute. Buckle up and hold on. This is going to be an exciting episode, I promise you. Welcome back, Keith. Glad to have you back in the jump seat. How you doing today?
Living the dream. Had to take a knee for a little bit. Glad to be back. It's awesome to be back. Thanks for having me as always, Sean.
Absolutely, brother. All right, so we're sitting down with Shannon, who served in the U.S. Army as an Apache pilot. She was one of the first female Apache pilots, and during her service, she said she led line units around the world. After her service, she earned an MBA at the Tuck School at Dartmouth, later her MFA. Using her years of experience in the Army and corporate America, she founded the Grit Institute, a leadership institute committed to whole leader development. She is the author of The Grit Factor, Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the Most Male-Dominated Organization in the World, as well as the memoir North of Hope. She also hosts the Grit Factor podcast. She is a community leader and currently lives with her husband and 2 children in Washington State. So happy to have you here today, Shannon. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Sean. It's wonderful to be here with both you and Keith. Thanks so much.
Well, we're excited to have you. You and I connected a little while ago, and just fascinated by your journey. And my first unit out of basic training and all that was an Apache unit. As an intel guy, so it was always fun because we went straight down range, and the only thing they wanted to know is where the shooting was coming from, so they could get shot at, so they could shoot. So I'm like, this is an easy job.
There you go. That's great.
So, all right, well, let's start with the transition. How did your transition out of the military go?
Yeah, that's and I'm so grateful that you're asking this question to so many of us, because it's a really important question and a lot more nuanced, I think, than sometimes we have a chance to answer. I think it was hard in many ways psychologically to make that transition from this place where you really knew what your mission was, you really knew what your purpose was. I went through business school full time after the military, and I think that was really helpful for me. It was a chance to focus in on something different, but at the same time, I left in August of 2001, and so I arrived at business school right before September 11th, and everything kind of went down, and it was really tough to be focused on what it was that I was trying to do in this kind of new world and new reality, when so many friends and all of what I knew was really doing something else that felt a lot more mission focused. So I think that lack of purpose and that lack of mission was really difficult for a while. Business school gave me those kind of 2 years of buffer to figure myself out a little bit and to figure out where I might land and try to envision myself in a different place, to do the interviews, to do the internships, that kind of thing, which I definitely recommend. But ultimately, it was successful, and I worked at a medical device company and ended up moving to Microsoft outside of Seattle and Redmond, Washington for a while before I started to do the work that I'm doing today. So that's kind of the long story compressed. But I would say it was definitely bumpy, and partly the timing, but partly you guys both know this too, and all of your listeners know this. It's a pretty big shift to make from a very mission-focused environment to a place where that's not quite how things roll.
Well, let's not, skip over the fact that you were flying a badass helicopter too. And now you're sitting in a classroom taking notes. It's that had to have some sort of impact.
I mean, you realize at some point, all of us do, right? That you've played with the best toys you're going to play with, and that's all right. That's all right. At some point, you make peace with that. But yeah, you're right. It's quite a different sort of a life and quite a different sort of a focus. I was a commissioned officer, so I also was at this place where after command, I actually did have orders for a follow-on command when I left the military. But you're going to be at a desk a lot more anyway. And I think that was part of the reason for my making the decision, was kind of looking at the years ahead of me and not necessarily being really excited about them. And so that was a good reason to make a shift.
Yeah, I think that the years between company command and battalion command aren't the most exciting in an officer's career. So some find some love there with the 3-shop or whatever, but that being in command is just something else, So
yeah, no, for sure. And I had a chance to work with some really amazing people, and that was a huge gift. So,
all right, before I let Keith jump in here, yep, no. I have to ask. So in my experience, there's a big Maverick Top Gun thing going on with Apache pilots. Were you one of those type or what?
I oh my gosh. I mean, I think there's like a certain ethos, right? There's a certain and but at the end of the day, what was I think very interesting to experience was to know that like there was a pretty broad range of types of people that end up in aviation and even that end up in attack aviation, actually a really broad range. And so I was the English major from Duke, right? So, but I loved it. I loved everything about flying. I loved everything about the shooting. I mean, the Apache is a great airframe to be in because you can shoot back, right? If you're in that kind of a situation. So, yeah, I don't think I probably would have earned that moniker, but you know, all of us wanted it a little bit. So,
What do you think, Keith?
I love it, and I love the direction that we're going to be going in this podcast because I'm already kind of assuming where it's going, right? The fact that you were the first female in this community to speak of, right? And then you get out right before 9/11, and you know I was in when 9/11 happened. I was already in. I'm old enough. I was in Kosovo too. You know, all that kind of stuff. Bosnia, but Bosnia had already calmed down by the time I got there. But so like how did that play out? Not play out, but like what was the mindset? Because I get it, right? Like I was in, but even my dad, like 2 tours in Vietnam in his 50s, I think at the point of 9/11, and he wanted to get back in. Like everybody's, you know, the country's pissed, right? Yeah. And so how did you take that, or what role did that play, if any, in this moving forward and creating the Grit Institute and the things that played out in your future?
yeah, that's such a good question, actually. You know, the initial months after 9/11, I remember this really specifically. I was in this business school class, and we're maybe 200 something. There was a group of us that were veterans, and so I remember standing with a Marine Corps veteran, and the 2 of us were watching the news down by the mailroom at school, and you know, most people are walking by and getting ready for whatever, for class or talking about the hockey game that night, and I just had this like visceral like anger that people were not connected to what was happening when you know the actual people that are being deployed and when you feel like you're the one that should be going. And I remember talking to my friend Bill and like, do you go back in? Like, what do you, and there was something that there was this realization, which is also a hard realization too, right? Which is that, you know what, the Army is a pretty big place, and you don't really make a ripple when you leave. So you're not there because of you. You're there because you're serving, and the Army's going to be just fine without you. And so there's that kind of challenging realization. I remember a couple years after that, walking like on a Saturday morning, you know, when I'm working in the corporate world, drinking my latte in Seattle, talking to my dad and saying, you know, I could go back in and maybe I could do some good. And, you know, I also, Sean had done military intelligence. They called it the officer's advanced course at that time. I think it's something different now. And I remember him saying, you know, you did your time, let other people do theirs. And there was kind of this release at that point, but it took a long time to get to that place where you're like, yeah, all right, other people have the watch, right? And I'm not as important as I'd like to think I am in making that happen. And that's all right, because there's other parts of life that are important and need us to contribute, that need every single one of us to contribute. And that is, I think, one of the most important lessons that I bring with me into the Grit Institute that I hope that I convey at every single keynote that I give to a company, that I give, you know, every single training that I do with either a business school or with a company or with offer to veterans as well, which is to say that the world needs every single person to show up, and there are so many places and so many ways that we're going to serve over the course of our lifetimes. And so really to internalize that the world needs us, right? And that we are here to contribute our best selves at all different phases of our lives in all different ways. And so I think that was a really important piece of, yeah, exactly what I'm doing today. No one's ever asked me that, Keith, but that's a great question.
We got to put the bomb logo back on this platform, right? There, Keith. I mean, she just dropped the mic, the bomb, and everything else. I mean, she's over there shooting hellfires again.
There you go.
That's so true. I mean, we bring, Not even veterans. Everybody has gifts,
Yes.
and you figure out what those gifts are and how you can use those to contribute to society, and you can make such a wonderful impact, And then you look at the veteran community. We bring our own gifts, but then we also bring all these things that we learned and were trained in, and our ability to contribute. And the other thing that I like to tell people, and this is a lesson that I'm still learning the hard way, is there's also a time when it's time to move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Like leaving the military for me, that wasn't that difficult. I did my 20 years. My body hurt. It told me it was time to go, so it wasn't a huge decision. But there's other organizations where I've probably stayed too long, volunteering or being, and it was just maybe things didn't align anymore. Maybe I had changed. Maybe it had run its course and it was time to move on to the next thing. So understanding that when you join an organization to help out and volunteer, it's not a life sentence. You're not in there for the forever. At some point, it's going to run its course, and maybe it's time to go on to the next thing and give to something else. So it's definitely interesting. But
That's a really important point, actually. I talked to some college kids and this group of actually women engineers from Duke that were working at the big tech companies in Seattle, and all of them were really, really worried that they were like, well, am I going down this path and maybe I'm not going to love it in 5 years or in 10 years? And the reality is, that's fine. That's totally fine. What I always say to whether it's a college graduate or a military veteran transitioning or somebody else making a career change is go to a place, give your absolute best, go and stay long enough to learn something of significance, like learn something enough to put on your resume, right? And contribute something of significance enough to put on your resume. And then assess, like, is this the right place for me to be contributing, or should I be contributing somewhere else? And if you always frame it in the context of your contributions, you stay long enough to learn and to contribute, then yeah, you're right, exactly. There is no life sentence, and I think especially in today's world, there's so many options, and it's good to even try a couple out to make sure that you're in the right place.
you alluded to the Grit Institute, right? So tell us about this. Tell us about the Grit Institute and what you're doing.
Yeah, the Grit Institute is the company that I now run, and it's the umbrella organization for the keynotes that I do to companies and organizations and associations, as well as training that's offered as well. And that's training that can either be taken as an individual or be taken as a cohort at a company. It's awesome if it can be in a cohort, because then you've got the type of thing you have with a cohort, or if you take it with a buddy. But there are 2 different 6-week trainings, and there is some overlap. So the Going for Grit essentially follows my book, The Grit Factor, and it lets you go deeper into that with videos and worksheets and kind of ways to really make those ideas your own. The book is here. I don't know if you can see it in the thing, but essentially it's not a book about me, by the way. This is a book about a lot of different leaders, lots of leaders in the vanguards of their fields, and they all happen to be military. So they talk about these challenges and these opportunities and the ways that they had to overcome things, to the point where we actually ultimately understand that there's this framework for grit and resilience that ultimately is also a framework for leadership. And that is this holistic, whole person idea. And it's not just this gunning through, right? I think that's often the misunderstanding about grit and resilience, is that it's sort of this kind of suck it up and push through. And there is an element of that for sure, but it's not a sustainable element. And so what we realize over time, looking at these many, many, many different stories and these different ideas, and then the psychology and the theory that goes behind it, is that the grit and resilience and leadership, which then transitions into the training that we do here, because this is what we need in our transitions between either organizations or jobs or phases of our life, is this idea that we start with this commit phase, this bottom of this triad. There's a grit triad, right? So 3 parts of the triangle, which is a helpful framework. And that bottom part of the triad is about really owning your own story and connecting to core purpose, your own individual core purpose. And I will say that part of it is something that took me a while to understand out of the military, because the military kind of gives you your purpose, right? And it's been delivered, it's offered up, and in fact, you're expected to take it. And so when you get out, you've got to define it for yourself, and that can be hard if you haven't done that work earlier, which I had not. So that commit phase is the root of all grit and resilience. And then you go into the next phase, which is this learning, or this kind of deep engagement in the present. And you build your team or take care of your team if you're a leader. You learn the art and the science of active listening. I actually love it. I found this kind of graphic in this old like training module from the Army that actually covers all of the modern science that they're talking about now, with like how it is that you orient your body and you orient your mind. And so this active listening is a critical part of leadership, but also this transition so that you're operating with integrity in whatever environment it is that you're finding yourself. And then ultimately the mindset of grit and resilience, I can talk about that all day. And it's multiple pieces, and a lot of the work comes from looking at the military, actually. And then that final phase after that deep engagement in the present is launch, and that's with having audacity, the willingness to take risks, which it feels like when you're making your transition out of the military, right? You're making a big risk. It's a lifestyle change. It's an environment change. It's an organizational change. And you have to be willing to take those risks and fail once or twice and then just get up and continue the mission, right? And then authenticity, showing up as you really are. And then ultimately adaptability, being able to pivot with circumstance. And all of those things are hard when you've been in an environment that's really kind of given you the framework, and now you've got to kind of create that framework for yourself. So the work of the Grit Factor, the work of the Grit Institute, is to help you along the way in the context of that framework that has worked for so many other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. And so and I noticed in your book too, like there's, like you said, right, it's not about you, right? There's so many, and it's a lot of other women, especially trailblazing women who have, that are the first in a lot of their fields, kind of thing. So what were the common threads that you found among that like amongst all their stories? What was the one commonality with that one not delineation, but you know what I mean? You know where I'm going with this. And with that, how can organizations use that common thread to foster resilience within their organizations?
That's such a good question. Yeah, really, both of those great questions, because the leaders that are part of the Grit Factor are actually really different. And your audience will understand this. I think there are a lot of people that are a civilian audience sometimes doesn't. They kind of stereotype what a veteran is, or, we're sort of put in a box, right? But these are widely different. I mean, just incredibly different people. And they all come into the military and they serve, and so they have their own unique challenges. But the threads that come out consistently, and I would say actually the thing that I didn't speak to that is really important is kind of a circle that surrounds the triad. And this is all, again, what these leaders have in common. And it didn't mean that it was easy, and it didn't mean that they understood it as they began their transitions or as they pushed through the challenges. And the same was true for me. A lot of this is retrospect and applying the models and applying other people's stories. But one of the things that's really critically important is the idea of the Stockdale Paradox. Have you guys ever talked about that on your show, the Stockdale Paradox?
I don't think so.
All right, this is a great one. You're going to love it. You're going to love it. So,
about to learn.
Yeah, there we go. All right, so the Admiral Stockdale was actually a lieutenant in Vietnam. He was a Navy pilot. He was flying low over the trees in Vietnam. He was shot down. He was captured almost immediately, and he was held at the Hanoi Hilton for 7.5 years. His legs were broken twice. He was tortured like 14 times. He was in solitary for half of that time. So all of a sudden, COVID puts on, right? COVID seems easy. And so when they released him, and now he had gone to Stanford and actually studied Stoicism. So this is going to help to frame his answer a little bit. But they said, what's the difference between those who lived and those who died? Like, how do you get through this kind of unbelievably challenging experience? And he said it's easy. The optimists died, right? The optimists were the ones who were like, surely we'll be released by Easter, and Easter came and went, and nothing changed. Or surely the war is going to be over by September, and September comes and goes, and nothing changes. He's like, they died of a broken heart. So here's the Stockdale Paradox. And he's not entirely right on the way that he frames this either, so we'll come back to that in a second. The Stockdale Paradox is this. So Admiral Stockdale says, you can never, ever lose faith that you will ultimately prevail in the end, balanced with the brutal realities that you face in the present. That's the Stockdale Paradox. You can never, ever lose faith that you'll ultimately prevail in the end. You may not know the way. You may have to change the path. You're going to have to push through a lot of stuff, but you will ultimately prevail, balanced with the brutal realities that you face in the present. So you're not being a Pollyanna. You're not pretending everything's fine when it's not. it's addressing those things that you need to address, but knowing that you're going to get there eventually. And we call that this mindset of grounded optimism. And that's where he was slightly wrong, in the sense that Stoicism kind of doesn't believe in optimism. But there were 3 independent Navy studies that looked at POWs in Vietnam, and every single independent study determined that optimism was the key to their success. So here's the beautiful thing about that, because this is this mindset, right? This mindset that you have to approach the Grit Triad with. And the Grit Triad represents kind of the red thread of all of these leaders, right? Is you have the opportunity and the responsibility to choose your mindset. And you choose it every day. And sometimes when things are rough, you choose it like every minute of every day. But mindset is something that only each one of us chooses for ourselves. It's not given to us. We don't just take it. We have to choose it, and we get to choose it. And so I think that's the real power of the Stockdale Paradox, that every single one of the leaders of the Grit Factor understood, that ultimately led them to doing that deep work of owning their story, connecting to purpose, and then moving forward with their team, with listening, with the other aspects of mindset that are so important, and then being willing to take those risks, face failure, show up as who they were, and ultimately be adaptable. So I hope that will be a helpful tidbit for your listeners. It's been helpful for me.
Took us to school. I love it.
All right, there you go. There you go.
And honestly, when I work with transitioning service members, that's very similar. I frame it differently. I liken it to a knife fight, right? You go into a knife fight, you're going to get cut. Statistically speaking, you are going to get cut. So when you go into that knife fight, you have to know that going in, because once you get cut, which you will, if you're not expecting it, it'll take your mind off the fight, right? And your mindset needs to be, I'm going home at the end of this thing, right? And so transition's no different, right? You're going to fail in your transition. And I liken it to the knife, but it's the same kind of mindset, right? Like, optimistic that I'm going to make this through, but it's not going to be all roses and rainbows and unicorns, right? So, it's going to be tough, but in the end, I will be okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have the same takeaway from all the knife fights I've been in, Keith.
Right.
Yes.
I train security teams on the side too. So like when we get to the knife fighting portion, it's like, all right, like if this ever happens in real life, you're going to get cut. We're going to show you today, like with fake knives, once you feel it into your ribs, that's you getting cut.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think that is really the other piece of it that even precedes that, I think, is to understand that you are starting out again, right? And it's not like all of the people aren't going to understand everything that you've been through and everything that you've done. And so knowing that you're going to have to spend some time kind of proving yourself, and proving yourself actually has a lot to do with kind of going back to school, right? Like go back and learn as much as you can about this new environment. Take every single class you can. Take every single leadership development course that you can. All of that work is going to make you better in this new position that you've moved into. And if it's, taking on a small business, it'll be a little bit different, but you can still train. You can train yourself on YouTube now. You can train yourself using edX now, and it's all free, right? Like all of that, you don't have to go back to school for that. So do the work and know that you're going to have to kind of put in the reps and prove yourself. But it will ultimately work out. It will ultimately work out. And you just get up every time you fall, and you show up and you smile and you face it again. So.
Yeah, the transition. First of all, I'm glad, Keith, that you do all your mentoring virtually and you're not actually stabbing people. But
they're fake knives. You feel it. You just don't get actually cut.
We're going to really teach you about transition today, kid. But like I always talk about grace. Giving yourself grace. Because you're going to fail. In transition, things are going to go sideways. There's nothing wrong with that. You're doing something you've never done before.
That's right.
So don't beat yourself up about it. Learn from it, move on, and continue down the road. And just absolutely love the work you're doing, and the mindset thing is so powerful. One of my favorite things I did in the military was being a resiliency trainer. I absolutely loved the program. A lot of people hated it, thought that this was making us soft and everything. Okay, you're not really paying attention to what we're talking about then.
Right.
But taking those skills and it's one of those things that I try to continuously work on just within myself. Having struggled with anger and things like that through my career. The resiliency tools really helped me cope with that. Probably the best thing that I did have to help me cope with that. And so trying to help other people learn that you have to work on these resiliency skills in the good times so that they're there in the bad times. You can't just say, oh, well, now I'm going to do this. No, you got to work on it. It's something you have to keep developing.
Yeah, and you can, right? Like that's the opportunity for all of us. And actually, I love that you brought that up because there is a lot of that work that comes from University of Pennsylvania's Positive Psychology Center, right? That made it into the Grit Factor because that is absolutely, those are the skills, those are the practices, the techniques, the exercises that you can do every day, even in 5 minutes a day, right? 5 minutes, 10 minutes a day, just practicing those things are so important. And the second thing I would just bring up, in addition to the kind of the Going for Grit framework, something that's come up over the last several years is some really interesting research around purpose and the necessity of us to connect to our purpose. And I think that that's one of the biggest pieces missing in veteran transitions is being able to redefine our purpose. So we now have a 6-week course on leading with purpose, which is really about finding your own, but Keith, you asked earlier, how do organizations bring that in? Every one of these techniques works for both the individual as well as the organization. And when you do the exercises with the organization in mind, owning the organization's story, where did we fail? Where did we succeed? What did we learn? What values came out of that? What's the story we want to tell? And then moving into purpose and really looking at that in a thoughtful way. We give 4 different paths to purpose, and it's super powerful work. I've heard from vets with TBI and others that are like, look, this totally changed my life. It changed how I was able to look at myself in the world, and so that means a ton to me to hear that because it's critical work for all of us to do. And so both of those courses are available to individuals or organizations at the Grit Institute.
Yeah, awesome. And time has gotten away from us. I just looked at the timer. I'm like, oh no. But I want you to expand on that a little bit more before we go. So folks that are interested, especially our transitioning service members, that's our primary audience, but anybody listening, how can they sign up for the program? What does it cost? What can they expect? Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, exactly. So we have different price points for like organizations, obviously, and individuals, but and we're going to put actually a particular code for your listeners onto the product. So if they use the code VET S.O.S, they're going to have there's going to be a 50% discount on what the normal price is for our regular attendees. And that is something you can find at thegritinstitute.com/courses. So you'll see it under offerings. Again, there's those 2 different courses. I do some additional work, one-on-one and in small groups as well. But that's probably the best place to start is with those courses just online at the Grit Institute. And if you reach out to me via the Grit Institute, it'll come straight to me. So thegritinstitute.com is the best place to find that.
That's awesome. Yeah. Before we wrap up, can we go back to purpose for just a second?
Yeah.
I'm one of those guys, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I still don't know, I have things that are very purposeful in my life, but, it's like I didn't dream of being a podcaster my whole life or whatever, you know what I mean? We hear this a lot with service members transitioning out. And I'm just curious, from your experience, the work you've done, research you've read, is there a connection between transitioning service members and not finding their purpose to all the things that go into transition, or is it maybe something else? I mean, I'm just kind of curious there because that's always a topic that comes up, about finding your purpose.
Yes.
And it's hard to say, well, just go do it, just go find it. It's right around the corner. Just go look for it.
Yeah. Purpose. It's so interesting, and that's why we have 4 different paths, and we actually start with going a lot deeper into your own story. A lot of the values-based work doesn't work for me, quite frankly, like where they give you a list of 100 values and they say pick 7 or something like that. I'm like, come on, like I can't pick 7, like I like 50 or, and so we really let you discover and uncover the values that you have lived in your story as you then move into purpose. And what we think of as purpose is not stationary, right? And actually, this is a great opportunity to explain this. It's a new concept that's going to be in the new book. But there are three stars that make up what we think of as the North Star, right? We think of the North Star as like this, the one thing at the end of the Big Dipper. There's actually 3 stars that make it up. That's a longer story, but that we can't quite see with the naked eye. We can't see at all with the naked eye. And the great thing about that is to understand that your North Star can vary over time. a little bit, right? Like it's within the same constellation, but it can vary over time. I call this the Polaris Principle. But there are times when it might be something that relates to your family or your community, or maybe it was the military. There are times when it might relate to something that's really deep inside of you. There's times that it might relate to something that, I call God. Somebody else might have another term for their universal connection, right? But it always is going to be in that constellation of people and the universal and something that's deep inside yourself. And we give people 4 paths to purpose because it's not a straight path, right? And it's not something you can just kind of go pull out of the drawer once you leave the military. It's something you have to uncover, and it's a journey of uncovering, I think. It's a journey of excavation. It's a journey of discovery. It's a journey of building that purpose through purposeful work. And purpose is always action-oriented. So I think it's important to define it. And so purpose is this is William Damon's definition from Stanford, and I love it. It's a stabilized intention, and it's something that is both meaningful to the self and contributes to the world beyond the self. That's what every single one of us needs to find, right? We want to find. It won't always be the same throughout our lives, and that's why we have these multiple approaches to get there. But meaningful to the self and meaningful to the world beyond the self. And I think that's the key, is that it's this directional, values-based work. You don't arrive at purpose. You constantly move towards purpose. And you do that by reaching beyond yourself towards those things that matter to you the most.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
All right. So, Sean, you put us over time. Thanks. I still have questions. So, but you're the main guy, so I guess you get. So, I got 3 rapid fire questions.
Okay.
They're going to be fast and furious, but I'm going to say them all now, and you can answer them right in your answer all back to back. So, first of all, if you could have any soundtrack playing in your Apache cockpit, what would it have been? Right? What song? Secondly, would it have helped or hurt your landing? And thirdly, one more time, how could people get in touch with you and or the Institute?
All right. I was about to say Kenny Loggins, but that's way too cheesy. So I'm going to say Sweet Home Alabama, Fort Rucker, Alabama. I think it would definitely help the landing, for sure.
Yeah.
And they can find me at thegritinstitute.com. I'm almost on Instagram at The Grit Institute and at Shannon H. Polson, and primarily at LinkedIn at Shannon H. Polson as well. I'd love to meet all of your listeners and be of service in any way I can.
Thank you so much for coming on. The show's been absolutely amazing. Yeah, I love what you're doing out there for our community, at the veteran community and at large. So thank you so much. And on behalf of the VET S.O.S family, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. VET S.O.S is growing and expanding. You can follow us on all the social media platforms. Make sure to check out all 3 of our shows, to follow and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts from. And we're on YouTube, Reach Across America Radio, the Parade Deck, and all your favorite podcast platforms. And remember, don't drown in the sea of transition. Grab the VET S.O.S Lifeline.